My name's Ashley. I'm alcoholic. Hey, everybody. I don't know if that's working, so I'll try to speak loud. All right. Well, I'm Ashley. I'm alcoholic, and my job here tonight is to tell you what I was like, and what happened, and what I'm like today. And I'll start out by saying that I have a sobriety date. It's March the 15th of 2016. We got a home group. It's Keeping It Sober group in Aberdeen. We meet on Tuesday at 8, open discussion, Saturday at 8 for open speaker. So if you're ever down that way on a Tuesday or Saturday, come check us out. And I do have a sponsor. He introduced me, and he's got a sponsor, and so on and so forth. And I have the privilege today to sponsor some other guys. So I'll start from the beginning. I was born in Sanford, not too far up the road here, out in Deep River actually, a little small town. There ain't a whole lot going on out there. Wallace tell you that, he lived out there. We ain't got no stoplight, a couple of stop signs, that's about it. But my earliest memories, I was 4 or 5, I guess, and my parents they split up, and I remember being angry. I don't know who or what I was angry. I was angry at both of them. Felt like my mama ran my daddy off. I felt like my daddy had abandoned us, and so I remember I got the bright idea I was going to run away too, and so I took off out through the yard, and I don't know how fast a 4 or 5 year old runs, but it ain't fast. And I didn't get far, and my daddy, he scooped me up and brought me back. So that was my first shot at running, and I didn't make it far. I got better as I got older. But growing up, I never wanted for anything. There was plenty of love and stuff. I always had stuff. I was the only child for a long time, for about 13 years, and I would have probably preferred to have still been the only child, but my daddy had my little sister when I was about 13, and I started out right away. I didn't like her because I knew she was going to get that little princess crown, and she did, and she still got it today, and that's okay. She can get about anything she wants. But I did too. I can't complain. I got any and everything that I wanted, and I had a very large extended family. Like I say, my parents were split up. It seemed like their parents were split up, and everybody was split up. And so Thanksgiving and Christmas and stuff was just, it was overwhelming sometimes because we had to go here and there, and we couldn't ever just enjoy it and be okay. There was always going, and that's just kind of how I grew up on the go all the time. Lived with my mama, me and her. We had a little single wide that we lived in, and stayed beside my grandma, and she had a beauty shop. So I grew up in a beauty shop, and I don't know what that does for a young man, but I know that the little old ladies would come in there, and they loved them some Ashley, buddy, and I loved that they loved me because from early on it was all about me, and I enjoyed that attention from them little old ladies, and I carried that on with me throughout, still to this day probably. But I know I never felt like I fit in with my friends. They had families that were intact and together, and I just didn't. From the outside looking into them, it looked like they had the perfect little world set up. They had mommy and daddy at home, they had houses, and here I am, broken up family, living in a little single wide. So I never felt of myself. I didn't feel like I really fit in with them, and it was nothing that they done to warrant that. It was just how I felt on the inside, I will say that I started going to AA meetings probably around the age of 7 or 8, and I thought y'all were weird, really. I didn't understand why men, it was all men, I don't remember seeing any women, but old men just getting up, talking, smoking, and just talking. And I thought, how weird is this, like, I will never, ever go to anything like that on my own, you know what I mean? But God had other plans, and he saw fit that I come back and find out what it was all about. And thank God, that it was here whenever I needed it. But I will say that it was forming and shaping my life from early on. My mother's father, he was an alcoholic, and he killed himself when I was about 2 years old. I don't remember it, but I heard stuff growing up. And I heard that he had tried that a lot of times, before that one night when he finally pulled it off. And I can relate to that because I thought about it many nights there toward the end. And I believe what really kept me from doing it was I didn't want to put my mama through that again. I knew she had already been through that one time, and I just didn't have the wherewithal to pull it off in the end. And like I said, God had other plans. But on the same note, I had another grandfather that, I guess was an alcoholic. He says that he is. I never saw him drink, but I know that from an early age, we were going and doing all the time. He probably done more with me than any of my other family members did. Basketball games, football games, like it seemed like we were always going and doing something. And what I know today is that's all a little kid really wants. Really is time, with family and loved ones. And I know also today that I stole a lot of that from my kids. I'll get more into that later. I'm a little nervous. I don't know that I've ever seen this many folks here. So I don't know who y'all heard was speaking tonight, but Lord, I apologize if y'all were coming looking for something greater. But I did play sports, and that was kind of my escape. That was where I could go and kind of get away from myself, really. I could go out there and I could be Ken Griffey Jr. or, whoever I wanted to be. Ken Griffey is just who I looked up to as a kid. And I didn't have to be Ashley during that hour and a half out there on the ball field. And I enjoyed that. And my daddy, he was my coach. He coached me all up through, high school. I grew up in church. I went to church a lot. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Monday night, Wednesday night. Like every time the doors were open, I was going. And, I never could get what those people looked like they were getting out of it. My grandma, bless her heart, she's a little bitty thing. And if it rains hard enough, she's liable to just start walking across a puddle. Like, that's how holy she is. She might start walking on the water right there in front of you. And it's amazing, really. But I never was able to comprehend what they were laying down in them churches. I tried. I went. I participated. I knew a lot about God, but I know today I never had a personal relationship with God. I missed that somewhere along the way. It was at church where I took my first drink. I was 13. We were having a lock-in. It was Friday night, and I remember it. I probably remember this better than maybe I remember anything in my whole life. But we were playing basketball on the blacktop there, and some of the older kids were over off on the side. They were hanging out around the vehicle, and they were, just having a good time, laughing and cutting up. And I said, well, let's go see what they're up to. And I went over there, and I was handed a little cup very similar to that right there, and it looked like it had water in it. It was not water. I smelled it, and it smelled horrible. And I was at a crossroads, and I knew what was in this cup was what I had been told all my life growing up. Don't drink that, don't stay away from that stuff. And I'm not going to say that they pressured me into it, but they pressured me into it. And they said, "Go ahead, man. You'll like it." And I smelled it another time, and man, I mean, it just smelled like hairspray. That's what it reminded me of. I don't know if I got that from growing up in the beauty shop or what, but that's what it reminded me of, was hairspray. And I said, well, why not, you know, and I got me a big old pull off of it, and it tasted worse than it smelled. And man, it was so hot going down. But, you know, that hot feeling was soon followed by this nice warm blanket type feeling. And it was very, I'll tell you, I never felt that way on a Sunday morning like I did that Friday night. Like that was what I had been looking for right there. And I cut up and I acted a fool that night, and I had a good time. I don't believe that I passed out. I didn't throw up. I didn't do none of the stuff that I come to do later on, you know, during my later drinking years. But I just had a ball. I really had a good time. I woke up the next morning, and my friends were telling me, you know, what a clown I had been the night before, and they were excited for me, and that in turn made me excited. And you know, I knew right then. I said, the way that I felt last night, like I've got to go for that again. It was a very eye-opening experience, and it was what I've been looking for. You know, it enabled me to get out of myself and to be what I always wanted to be, just open and free. You know, all that stuff that had been holding me down those 13 years, like it came out that night, and it came out in a good way. You know, I knew at 13 it probably wasn't going to be something I was going to be able to achieve, you know, on the daily, but it became a weekend regimen. I would work my way through the week doing whatever I had to do around the house to get a little money so I could contribute to the pot on Friday night when me and my buddies got together. We had four-wheelers, and we lived out in the country, and we went out in the woods, and that's what we done. Friday night, Saturday, and Saturday night. And it was around this time that other stuff came into play. I'm not confused about anything. I am an alcoholic because of what this book describes an alcoholic to be. But I have had other stuff present in my life and in my body throughout my time. I'm going to try to not hit too much on that, but it's part of my story, you know. But I do have the utmost respect for Alcoholics Anonymous, so I'm going to try to keep it strictly alcohol related. So that's kind of how it went, you know, through the early years, 13 to 16. And then I got my license, and then I was free because I had been bottled up in this little town my whole life, right? So I got my wings when I got 16. I was able to fly a little bit, and man, that's kind of where things really started kicking into high gear. You know, I was able to get out and find people that I had not been able to find prior to that, just because of logistic reasons. And I started hanging out with whoever could give me the best deal at the time. You know, I didn't really have a group that I ran with. I would go with whoever had whatever I wanted at that time. And I didn't apply myself a whole lot through school. I didn't really have to. It kind of came natural to me for whatever reason. And you know, around the time that I got my car and got all this freedom and stuff, sports kind of went out the window, and because the partying scene was a lot funner than at the time than the sports were. So that's just kind of what I got into. And my grades and my test scores were good enough to where I was allowed into a university. And you know, I'd done some research and stuff, and I think it was Playboy actually had ranked colleges on a scale of 1 to 10 of party schools. And this particular school was in the top 10, and it was in North Carolina. And I said, that's where I'm going right there. And so I ended up in Greenville at East Carolina. And I mean, the first night there, you know, I got moved in, my parents got gone, and here I am, 18, 19, right by myself with all these pretty things around me, and I met some people that night, and my dorm was right across the street from downtown, and we hit the street, and I remember having a ball, and I don't know when that ball stopped rolling, but the next morning I woke up, I was in a bush, and I don't know how I got there. I just remember waking up, and I felt the sun hitting me. I knew I was outside. It's kind of prickly, and I kind of came to, and I was like, man, I'm right in the middle of a bush. And I remember thinking, like, wow, this is going to be a good year here. That's kind of how my year at East Carolina went. There wasn't a whole lot of schoolwork going on. I went to class. The second semester, they put me in some of them classes that are for the slower kids. And I was okay with that because they were easy. I didn't have to apply myself a whole lot in them. But so I was coming home on the weekends and working with my daddy. Him and my grandpa, they had a roofing business, and so I would come home and work and get me some money and get me some stuff together to take back with me to get me through the week ahead. And toward the end of the year, I had met a girl, and we dated for a couple of weeks, and then a couple of weeks later, I had not heard nothing from her, and it was coming up on the end of the year. I'm gonna say like maybe 3 days left, and she called me and she said, Ashley, I'm pregnant. And I said, my Lord, whose is it? Because for sure it won't mine. Like, I have not talked to you in 2 weeks. Like, where are you even coming from with this? Like, why did you pick me to tell this to? But it turns out she called the right person. It was mine. And so I left. I left school. Like I say, I didn't have long left at all, but I just up and left. Because I knew things were kind of coming unglued a little bit. I knew that my behavior was getting out of character. I had never been really much of an aggressive person, but I was starting to fight in Greenville. I was starting to get in trouble with the law and stuff like that. And I started taking I started right then when I found out this information about this baby. I started finally taking an inventory per se, at what I had been doing the last couple of years, and I wasn't real happy with it, And I said, well, I'm gonna get back to Sanford, and I'm gonna get this thing turned around. I'm gonna be there for my daughter. I'm never gonna leave her. I'm not gonna do what my daddy done to me. I'm gonna be there for this kid, and I'm not throwing off on my ex-wife at all, but she was kind of partying and doing the same stuff I was doing, and I thought it might be a good idea to tell her, for the sake of the baby, to let's stop doing this. But I also remember thinking, like, man, she might ask me to stop too if I say something to her about it. So I said, I just won't say nothing. We'll just keep going and see what happens, And what happened with that was that we ended up with a baby that was born addicted to a substance, and she came out. She was screaming and crying and shaking. She was so red, and I was scared, and I just cried. This time in my life, this was supposed to be such a beautiful thing. It was anything but that at the time, and I knew why. The doctors in Lee County, they knew why. They put her on an ambulance and they sent her up here to more regional, and that's where she stayed for the first 3 months of her life in NICU. She couldn't eat on her own. She had a feeding tube inserted through her nose, where they fed her through that, and she just looked pitiful, and I knew what it was that had put her in that condition. And I'd like to say that was enough to turn me around, to get me on the right track, but it wasn't. Our book talks about a human power not being sufficient enough. What it takes is a power greater than ourselves. And I think about that. I look back and see that little baby laying there, and I know what it means when it says that, because that probably should have been sufficient enough reason right there, but it just won't at the time. You know, God had other plans again. You know, I got a job, and I was working at a factory, 12-hour shifts, either 7 to 7, morning to evening, or evening to morning. And what I found out was that the store close to where I worked, and when I got off, they started selling beer at 7 o'clock, and I got off at 7 o'clock, and that worked out perfect. So, you know, it didn't matter if it was 7 in the morning or 7 in the evening. Like, Ashley was drinking when he got off work because I work. I deserve it, you know. I need a little time to unwind. And, you know, it started out pretty good. I could turn it off about 9 or 9:30, lay down, go to bed, get up and go to work, and go on about my life. But 9:30 went to 10, went to 11, went to 12, went to 1. And man, it started getting harder and harder to get up and go to work, you know. And I remember noticing this change in behavior and the change, but not really thinking nothing about it, you know. And again, around this time, I was introduced to some stuff to kind of help me carry on throughout the nights when it got tough to stay awake while at work. And I had another baby during this process, and she came into the world the same way. She didn't have quite the side effects. They were not nearly as bad with her as they were with my first daughter, but there were some. I can tell you today, by God's grace and mercy, that they are both healthy, and I mean, just as full of life as too full of life sometimes. Like, they are, man, they are something else. They really are, but they're miracles. And my oldest little girl had a lot to do with me, with my surrender position this time. But I'll get into that. I don't want to jump ahead. So you know, the behavior, it was just getting worse and worse. But again, I thought I was justified. I was working. I was bringing home the money. Pretty good money. You know, it was good enough to where my wife didn't have to, she didn't have to work. She was able to stay at home and look after the kids. So by all accounts, I thought I was doing all right. You know, we had some vehicles out in the driveway. We had a place to stay. Like, I'm doing pretty good. I'm taking care of what I need to take care of, when the whole time, like, it was slipping out up under my feet and I didn't even know it. And, you know, my employer, they seen my behavior, and they called me into the office one day and they said, Ashley, like, you're a good worker, but something has changed in you since you started, and we don't really want you working here no more. And man, I looked at them and I thought, my God, do y'all know what y'all are doing getting rid of me? You know, because I got all this pride and ego still, and I'm the best thing since Jesus himself, you know. And but I haggled with them a little bit, but they had their mind made up. Like, they were getting rid of Ashley Riddle. And so I got fired and came home, and I was like, man, what am I going to do now, you know? And what I done, I just started, had a little pity party for about 3 months, and I just started drinking and doing other stuff heavier than I ever did. And where that landed me, well, I was in the bed there for about 7 days, about a week straight one day. And a buddy of mine came over and talked to me, and he said, man, you look terrible. I said, man, I feel terrible. And he said, you might ought to think about detox. And I said, man, I don't need detox. I said, I'm not that person, you know, that needs anything like that. Like, I'll feel better in a few days. I'm pretty sure I got the flu or something, and I'll be okay. You know, I'll feel better. Well, 2 or 3 more days went by, and I didn't feel better. And I called him back, and I said, tell me a little more about this detox thing. He said, I'll take you. I said, okay. So we came, and you know, the whole ride up here, I was like, they're not going to take me. Like, I'm not the prototypical detox person, you know. And I got up there, and I talked to the intake person, and I might have told him a quarter of what had actually been going on. And he said, "By God, you're just a garbage head, aren't you?" And I said, "Man, who are you talking to?" You know? And he said, "Yeah, we got a spot for you. Come on in." And took me by surprise. So I came on in, and I just went to bed that night. But the next day I woke up and I started talking. Now at this time it was not a third floor. It was second floor. We were all together with the behavioral and the detox. And man, there was probably 30 people in there. And I got looking around and I met this lady. And I met this lady. And she was in there. What she had done took me aback. She had, Dan, I'm going to. Dan's heard me share this before in detox, and I don't know how appropriate it is, but it's the truth. She had super glued her butthole shut, and I knew right then that I had overreacted, that I did not need to be in this detox facility, that this was not a place for me. Like, I don't belong here, you know, and I thought seriously about checking out after she told me that, and but I didn't. I stayed, and I was talking to the counselor lady there, and I started, you know, getting a little bit open and honest with her, and she suggested that maybe I go to a 28-day treatment facility. And I tried to explain to her all the important stuff that I had going on back at home. But, I mean, she knew that I had lost my job and this and that, and she kind of saw through my BS, and she was like, "Well, I think it'd be a good opportunity for you." So I said, "Ma'am, I think I overreacted coming here. I sure don't need 28 more days." And, but it turns out that I did go. And, you know, I learned a lot of good stuff at that treatment place. And I started learning a little bit about me. I started learning a little bit about alcoholism as a disease. And I was okay with the first half of the first step, you know. I wasn't real comfortable calling myself an alcoholic. I read through this book, but I might as well have been reading Chinese. I didn't understand it. I did not understand this sitting down and reading it by myself in that treatment facility. I acted like I did. I went through the motions and made it look and sound good, but I did not put my I didn't put my heart into it. I have measured it. I know that today. And, you know, getting out, they suggested that maybe I go to a halfway house, and you know, I was at this point I was through. I was done, you know. The whole detox treatment thing, like I was just ready to get back home. And they talked about going to meetings and getting a sponsor, and I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna do all that." And I started going to some meetings, and I knew in my heart who my sponsor was going to be. I had it all lined up. I was in treatment, and I knew getting out. I said, I know who my sponsor was going to be. I never shared it with anybody. You know, I never asked anybody, "Hey, I might ask this person." So I was going to meetings. It was Wallace, me and Wallace. He was carrying me. You know, we would go to the noon meetings in Sanford. We came here a few times, and he always would tell me about this guy that he was sponsoring, Bruce. He said, "You need to talk to Bruce. Well, I'll give you Bruce's number. Why don't you call Bruce?" And the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, like, we're not worried about Bruce. Like, this is going to be the Ashley and Wallace show here. And so finally one day I asked him, and he said, "I can't do that." And man, that made me mad. And I did not understand at the time what he meant by that. I can look back and know today exactly what he meant by that. And my head was still way off over here. It was not attached to this. You know, and I just, I didn't like that. I had this thing in my head. I had already planned out the next 30 years, you know. I was 30 years sober. I was going to be, you know, I don't know what I was going to do. I was going to be sober, I know that. Off of his sobriety, right? And we know how that works. It doesn't. This is an individual deal. So needless to say, I got a job with a roofing company, and the guys, they would get them a beer at lunchtime every day, and I never once had a thought about getting a beer with them. You know, they knew that I had just come out of treatment, and I just wasn't even interested in it. Until one day, just out of the blue, I didn't wake up that morning and say, I think I'm going to drink a beer at lunchtime with them guys. But they were going in the store, and I was like, you know what? I'm about 90 days. Like, I probably deserve a beer at lunch. And so I went and I got one. And that just made me want another one. And I went back and got another one. And I left work early that day. I checked out on them. I said, boys, I got to go. Like, this thing has started. I could feel it, and I was on the roll, and that roll lasted for 5 or 6 more years. And where it ended me up at, I'll just skip through these next 5 or 6 years. I ended up. I had another kid. I bounced around. I probably lived in. I probably moved every 6 months. I bet I moved 10 to 12 times, just always running away, thinking that whenever I get to where I'm going next, like, it's going to change, and it never did. If anything, it always got worse. It never stayed the same. It never got better. It always got worse. And one night, I ended up somewhere I should not have been. Looking back on it today, I know I shouldn't have been there. Shouldn't have went over there, but I did, trying to prove a point, and I got stabbed. And the guy, he stabbed me over and over and over again. And somehow I made it. I made it to the hospital. I don't remember getting to the hospital, and I made it on a helicopter. I don't remember getting on the helicopter, but they flew me to Chapel Hill, and I don't remember any of this, but I remember waking up. It was a day or so later, I don't know. And I got all this stuff hooked up to me, and I can't feel nothing. Like, my eyes are open, but I feel like I don't know where I felt like I was, but it surely won't where my eyes were. And I was like, man, what just happened? And the doctor, he came in there, and there was nobody else, just me and him. And he sat down and he said, son, you're a lucky young man. And I just remember looking at him like he was crazy. Like, what is lucky about this? You know what I mean? Like, this is unlucky, if anything. But, he told me that I had not made it, and that they were able to bring me back. And I did not understand at the time the gravity or the weight of the words that he had just spoke to me. I know today that just another example of God looking out for me. When I could have absolutely cared less about God or about His plans or about anything He had to offer. And I remember people coming to see me, and I done a lot of crying throughout this time. And I don't know why. I just remember I'd come home from the hospital, and I'd be laying on my mama's couch, and I'd just start crying because I could feel something in here shifting and changing, and it wasn't my organs. They had stitched them back up, but it was up here, and and I fought that. I fought that feeling because it was familiar. It was a familiar feeling, God had worked on me a few times before in my life, and I know what that tug on the heart feels like, and I fought it. Now, I didn't want to have nothing to do with that. And for about the next year, I lost another job. I started doing things that I would have told you at an early age I'd never do, hurting people in ways I never thought that I'd hurt them. Just absolutely bankrupt spiritually on the inside, just feeling like an awful, dirty person. And that was around the time when I would start going to bed at night and just like, God, just end it. Let's just end it tonight. Like we were so close back, a couple months ago. Like, why'd you let me live through this? If this is what it's going to be like, I had made up in my mind that the way I was living those last few months was how it was going to be the rest of my life, and I wasn't okay with that. But I did not foresee a future like this program has provided, or like God has provided. I saw it going the other way. I really just wanted to die. I didn't care about anything or anyone anymore, and that's the God's honest truth. And it was coming up on the year anniversary of my getting stabbed. That happened on March the 18th of 2015. Around March the 12th, my oldest little girl came up to me. She was about 9 at the time, and she said, she was crying. She said, "Daddy, I don't know what's wrong with you, but you don't look good. I wish you'd just go and do something. Get yourself some help." What she was asking is that I leave. I just get out of her life. She was fed up. She had saw what had been going on the last year or so, and she was upset. And I don't blame her. And I wanted so bad to reach down there and grab her and give her a hug and tell her everything was going to be all right, but I knew that it won't. And I just kind of shooed her away, and I went and drank some more because that was the only way I knew how to get rid of that little stirring that she had just caused in here. Those feelings that she had just brought up. I didn't like that, and I went and got drunk. And I tell you, those next few days were tough. I thought about what she said a lot. I know today, looking back, that God was speaking to me through that little girl that day. He was speaking directly to me through her, and I'm gonna say that this process started right around in there. It was not until the 15th, around 10 o'clock, and I remember this moment just as vividly as I remember my first drink. The kids, they were at school. I was in the bedroom doing nothing like I had been doing the last month, and I was standing up beside of the bed, and I fell on my knees right beside of the bed. I don't remember having a thought about doing that, but that's what happened. And I just said, "God, help me." And I stayed down there a while. I don't know if I was talking to him or if he was talking to me, but there was some communication going on there. And I got up, and I felt like everything was going to be okay for the first time in a long time. And I started making some phone calls, and I got into there was a place in Winston-Salem that was able to take me the next day. And I got into a treatment facility, and they started talking a little bit about the disease. They didn't stress AA a whole lot like the colony had done back, several years ago, but they did bring some meetings in. And I'll tell you, my last night there, it was it was supposed to have been an NA speaker meeting, and the speaker did not show up. And I was getting out the next day, so I guess they thought since I was the most senior person, I would be perfect to speak at 14 days sober. And I got up there and I done it. And man, I'll tell you what, like, God was working on me that night. And they were crying, I was crying, we was all crying. And I got through with that, and I was all over the place. I was all over the map. I was not ready for that type of whatever was going on. I wasn't ready for it, and I was a wreck the whole rest of the night. But luckily, I was getting out the next day, and I had it all lined up to go to Bethesda. I got down there, and there was a guy waiting for me from this group, Primary Purpose Group. I didn't know him from Adam. His name was Kevin, not Adam. But he said he was there when I got there. I was like, the lady, Miss B, the lady, the secretary, she said, there's somebody waiting on you. I said, I don't know nobody in Aberdeen. Who would be waiting on me? And it was him. And he told me, that he had spoken to my grandfather, and that he had asked him to just kind of keep an eye on me. And he picked me up, and we just rode around and talked. And I know today, looking back, like what he was doing was he was getting me started and prepared and ready for this journey. He was helping me take that first step that I took, when I got my feet on the ground. I really believe that God brought me through those first 14, 15 days. But what I needed after that was to find somebody that I could relate to. I didn't know who that was going to be. I didn't even know what that meant at the time. But I was down at the Wilder Building on a Tuesday night, and man, there was probably this many people, maybe more, and I was new. I mean, I was nervous tonight, and I know most of you folks, but I'll tell you what, not knowing nobody and being around 75 people is absolutely nerve-wracking. Especially, I mean, I did not like people anyway at this point in time. Like, I was an introvert to the fullest, and people and me did not get along. And there was this guy, I saw him from across the way, and I saw him walking, and I had a feeling that he was looking at me, and I looked away, and I was like, God, don't let this fella be coming over here. And I looked back, and he was still coming, and I thought about just turning and going the other way, but I stood there, and he said, hey, how you doing? And I had to shake his hand and tell him who I was and tell him I was new. He said, yeah, I know. And I know how he knew, because I looked like a fish out of water. But he talked to me about him, and he introduced himself, and he was nice, and he said it was good to see me there. And I ain't heard that in a while. Like, people did not want to see me around nowhere. The last few months of my being out there, and went into the meeting. And Kevin had been telling me to look for somebody that I could maybe relate to. So I went back, I called him that night. I said, hey man, I met this guy. Like, what do you think about him? And I told him who it was, and he knew. He said, yeah, I think he'd be a good person to sponsor you. So I next day or the next couple of days, I asked him, and I said, will you sponsor me? And he asked me a couple of questions, and I tried to answer them right then, because I was ready. I was ready to get after this thing. And he said, no, don't answer them right now. Call me tomorrow. I said, I don't want to. I said, I want to answer it right now. I said, I'm ready to start this thing. He said, well, you call me tomorrow. And, I mean, I felt like we had a little headbutting going on, right there to start with. I said, this guy don't get it. And, I was the one that didn't get it, But I called him the next day. I went home, and I wrote down what he had asked, and I wrote a paragraph for each answer, and I had it ready. I was going to be a shining star in his eyes. And I called him, and I started reading off all this stuff. He said a yes or a no would do. And I said, I got some pretty good stuff wrote down here. He said, yes or no is fine. And so I said yes to both. And he said, well, it'd be an honor. And I said, all right, I like that, an honor. And what happened was we started meeting. I started calling him every day like he asked me to do. We went right back here in one of these little rooms back here one night, and we sat down, and he taught me the 3-second prayer, and he taught me how to write out a gratitude list. Man, I was excited. I was just writing away, and I didn't have a clue what was going on, but I was excited. And I said, all right, I'll do this. And he said, pray on your knees. I said, I can do that. And he said, write this gratitude list out and read some stuff. And I said, all right. So I would call him, be like, hey, I've done everything you asked me to do. He said, all right, good. And that's just kind of how it went for a while there. We didn't do no small talk, and I was kind of hoping for a little small talk because I wanted him to listen to my problems, because I had a lot of them. And he just would always tell me to pray about it. And I thought, man, this guy don't get it. He ain't listening. And there were some times where I really thought seriously about, I had probably made the wrong decision. I might ought to go ask Kevin to be my sponsor. Me and this guy just didn't get it. Like we're not getting along. But I believe to this day that God put him in my life that night when he was walking up to me, and that's just my experience. God put a man in my life to show me this way of life, and that's what he's done. He's shown it to me. He hadn't talked about it and told me to go do it. He's done it, and I followed. And he took time out of his week every week on Tuesdays. That was our day. We'd meet before our home group meeting, and we started reading in this book. And I don't know what it is about sitting down and reading with another man. I had never thought of doing that. That was a new concept to me. But as we were going through it, stuff just started making sense this time. I can't tell you why, but it did. And I found out that I was in this book. I was what this book was describing. I was an alcoholic, and I knew that he was too, because the way he talked to me and the things he thought and the way he felt, I had never found anybody that I related like that to in my whole life, and that was key. That was crucial for me, just to finally have met somebody, because I bet I went to the hospital 15 times after my stabbing up until the time, just wanting help, knowing something was wrong and wanting some help, and just, I didn't know how to get that out into word form, that, hey, something's going on. I don't know what it is, but I need help, and I know it. But for whatever reason, I was able to open up and get these things out, get these feelings out with this fella, and that's where it started, and he got me into a home group, and he got me into service work. He got me doing stuff for other people. He got me praying. I would call him with these little petty problems I was having, and it was always pray about it, and then call me back. And what that turned into over time was that I wouldn't have to call him. I would just, when I felt something wasn't right, I could immediately go to prayer. And, what better way to take care of a situation? I don't know of any. And that's what he taught me. It's been a learning process and experience throughout this whole time. And that's where I'm at today. I just moved back home with my kids, and I'm going to end up with this. But that same little girl that had asked me to leave, she was a little hesitant about me coming back into her life. But I had been there a couple of days, and it was on my mind. I was thinking about how this prayer thing was going to go with them being there. And it happened. One day I was in there praying on my knees, and I heard the door open, and I felt like a deer in the headlights. I was like, oh. And she came in there, and she got down beside of me, and I looked over there, and she was like that. And I thought, man, how amazing is that right there, And I just looked at her, and she looked at me. I didn't ask her what she was praying about, because it ain't none of my business. That's between her and God, But, I know today that that's a lot better example than I was setting for in the past. So that, that's the direction that I'm going to keep trying to go for her and for the people about me. So thank y'all